Welcome everybody to our mini webinar today. I want to thank you all for joining us. My name is Julie Hill. I'm a horticulture outreach specialist for Rock and Walworth County. I'll be one of your moderators today. I also have Ann Weed here. She is a horticulture outreach specialist for Waukesha County. She'll be helping me moderate today. So we're going to use the Q&A function for your questions. Later on, after Amaya is done presenting, we'll try to get to as many as we can. I know the time is short and we'll try to get to what we can today. That Q&A function should be on the bottom of your screen if you're using a laptop, or if you're using a mobile device, you can tap the screen and bring up the menu and you should see that Q&A function. We're not going to use the chat feature, so if you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A. And we are recording this webinar. The link to the recording will be put on our Extension Horticulture Program website in about a week. Okay, so moving right along, we are fortunate to have Amaya Atucha here with us today. She is an associate professor and the Gottschalk Endowed Chair for Cranberry Research in the Department of Horticulture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She provides research-based information that improves crop production and profitability of the Midwest fruit industry. Amaya also teaches an undergraduate course on fruit crop production. So Amaya, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, well, thank you for having me, and let's get started so that we can cover all of the points that I want to share today about pruning apples, and then we can have some time for questions. All right, so today we're going to be talking about pruning apple trees to maximize healthy fruit production. And I'm going to be giving some, very general tips about pruning that are applicable to all trees, whether there are young trees, you have, a tree that maybe you haven't pruned for a very long time. All of the tips that I will be providing are applicable to every circumstance, and I'm happy to answer specific questions through the Q&A and the chat. So the first question is always, why do we prune? Why do we have to prune our trees? Well, first of all, we really need to be able to remove dead, disease, and damaged wood. This is really important to be able to remove the inoculus that might be there in this diseased wood that could extend to other trees or within the same tree and potentially kill your tree. So that is, one of the main reasons why we prune, just to be able to remove some of the damaged, dead, and diseased wood. The second one, and the most important when it comes to fruit production, and if I want you to remember something about this webinar is to increase light penetration. Light interception is the key to produce fruit. Fruit is basically the harvesting of light, of sunlight. And so the plants are so wonderful because they're able to take this light, this energy from the sun, and convert it into biomass, and in this case, into fruit. So increasing light penetration when we prune is key to have a long-term lived tree, but also to have a consistent yield and high quality of fruit. Why light is so important? First of all, because light interception is key to develop flower buds. If you have a tree that is shaded, especially in the inside, if you have an older tree that is shaded in the inside, you're never going to see any flowers because we need light to be able to form flowers. We also need light because it's going to be key to develop fruit color and quality. Sweeter apples with lower acidity and more color, you will only achieve them if you have good light interception. It's also really important to wound some of and to heal some of the wounds that you might be having in the tree due to pruning. And so also they're really important because light provides UV, and UV also helps control diseases. So that's the other reason why we want to open up the canopies and prune, so that we can get more light interception to heal some wounds, and also to be able to reduce the inoculus of diseases. The other reason why we prune, and this is specifically when we're talking about fruit crops, and in this case apples, is because it's a way of managing fruit low. I'm sure that many of you that have an apple tree in your house ended up with maybe too many apples that are very small. And a way of reducing the amount of apples that we have so that we can get higher quality apples is by pruning and taking away some potential fruit through the pruning process. And then the last reason why we prune is because we need to maintain the shape and the size of the trees. If we don't prune these trees are actually going to get way too big. And then we're also going to have a lot of this shaded canopy inside of the trees. That is what we're trying to avoid with pruning every year. So what happens to unpruned trees? What happens if we don't prune an apple tree? Well, it gets extremely big. Apple trees can grow a lot. And so that's what's going to happen if you don't prune them. Also, you're going to have so many branches that you're going to end up with, what we call a bush form or a multiple trunk. You have many, many, many trunks. And you ended up, again, with shaded canopies, and the yield is usually of small fruits. You ended up with a lot of vegetation, but not a lot of yield, and the fruit is of low quality. Again, the concept of dense canopy, this is really what we want to avoid. We want to avoid to have a lot of canopy inside the tree. We want to be able to get the light. And in the case that you're applying products, whether you're applying organic products to control pests and diseases, or you're applying conventional agrochemicals, you also want to be able to have an open canopy so that you get a more effective use of your products to control diseases and insects. If we don't prune them, what will usually happen is if we ended up with poor structure and framework, we can end up with branches that tend to have really closed angles. So those crotches are very narrow, and when we hang a lot of apples, they will just split. So that's the other reason why we want to prune our trees, because we want to be able to choose branches that are going to stay for a longer time, but they're in the right place and they have the right angle of insertion into the trunk. And then if you don't prune your trees, you're going to end up with a lot of these, crossed branches inside the trees that can break, and they can be a source of disease once they start decaying. So that's usually what happens with these old trees. Now, practical questions that I usually get: when is the best time to prune? Well, usually the best time to prune is at the end of the winter. So if you can stretch and wait until the very end of the winter before you see those buds are starting to swell, that is actually the best time. And that is usually by late March, even beginning of April. You really want to be able to do the pruning before you see that those buds are starting to swell and they're going to break. And the reason why you want to avoid doing the pruning when the buds are already swelling is it's very easy to rub them off when you're taking some of the material that you're pruning. So you want to wait as late as possible, but you still want to do it before you start seeing any activity. And why do we want to do it at this time? Because we want to avoid any cold damage. You can imagine that when you prune and it's very cold, it takes a little while for the plant to be able to heal that cut, especially if you're making big cuts. So there's two times of the year that you can prune. One of them could be in the fall, if you have a fall that is going to be a long, dry fall, which is not necessarily the case in Wisconsin. Some years we do, and some years we don't. And in commercial production, growers actually do prune sometimes in the fall because they have to cover so many acres that they have to start pruning. But they do know that they have the risk that they could potentially not heal those cuts, and then there could be cold damage. And then the other one is in the early spring or late winter, early spring, which is my recommended one. If you just have some trees in your backyard, this is the best time to actually get your pruning done. And then there's another opportunity to do some summer pruning. And for some of you, you might think about, summer pruning. Well, summer pruning is not really the same level of pruning as the pruning that we do in the winter. Summer pruning is helpful sometimes when you want to remove excessive growth or open up the canopy to expose some of the fruit to the light. So the intensity, the quantity of material that you're removing during the summer is maybe, 20% of the amount of material you will be removing during the winter. And the reason why is because when you prune in the summer and you do very intensive pruning in the summer and remove a lot of the material, the trees get very stressed because you are removing leaves that are producing sugars and photosynthesis. You're removing the source of nutrients that the plant is generating through photosynthesis. In the winter, there are no leaves, so they're not as stressed when we prune them, as I was saying, in late winter, early spring, than when you prune them in the summer. But there is a chance of doing summer pruning. And again, but this is a much lower intensity than the pruning that we do in the winter. What are the kind of tools that you need for pruning? Well, just handheld pruners is probably the most basic type of tools that you would need. These are for smaller branches. And when you want to do more of the corrective pruning, you will need something bigger like loppers are also needed. And then when you're trying to, bring back to life maybe those old neglected apple trees, you will really have to start getting some of the more powerful tool like a handsaw. So with these three types of tools, you are going to be able to do most of the pruning of your apple trees. So now that we know the timing, the tools that we're required to prune, one really important thing to know about when you're going to prune is to actually know where the flower buds are located in apple trees. And this is really important because if you're removing all these type of structures, you actually will end up with no flowers. And if you ended up with no flowers, what's going to happen is the tree is going to put all of that energy in producing more branches and more leaves, and you're going to have the counter effect that you're looking for with the pruning. You're going to end up with a lot of new growth because there's no fruit to calm down those trees. So being able to identify where the flower buds are to keep them and make sure you're not cutting them or rubbing them off is really important. So in apples, we have flower buds in two main structures. One, you can see this picture on the left side. This is a 1-year-old shoot. This is a shoot that grew somewhere between mid-May all the way until mid-July of 2021, the summer of 2021. And you can see at the very end here, this branch has a terminal bud that will have a flower. Okay, this is in 1-year-old wood. And then you can see on the right side, where you can see here, there are spurs. These are much, much smaller compressed shoots that start appearing in 2-year-old wood and older. Okay, so in this case, if we were to go and prune right now and we were to look at the trees, this kind of structure, these spurs, you will find them in wood that started growing in, the summer of 2020, a 2-year-old wood. Okay, that's the difference. And so you will find this type of structures in older wood. And as long as these structures, these spurs, are able to intercept light and they're well, the canopy is open and they get a lot of light during the growing season, those spurs every year are going to produce a flower, and every year they're going to produce fruit. So this is really a very, very productive structure. And most of the fruit is going to be produced in spurs. There are different cultivars. Some cultivars tend to have, propensity to have more terminal buds, flowers in terminal buds. Some others produce almost all of their flowers on spurs. And the majority of the cultivars of apples that we grow, they do produce in both types of structures. So then when it comes, okay, we already know, when to prune, the type of tools that we need, and where the flower buds are. Now I want to talk about the type of cuts that you need to do. So there's two different types of cuts. This type of cut is what we refer to a heading, in which you take a portion of a branch. You make a cut and you take a portion of a branch. And so that is referring to heading. And then we have what we are referred to thinning cuts, in which you take the entire branch from the base, from where it originates. So the heading cut means you take a portion, a distant portion of your branch, but you still leave some of them, as you can see in this picture. And then the thinning one is when you remove all of it. So here's some step-by-step advice that I would take of how to prune an apple tree. The first thing that you want to do is you want to go ahead and remove everything that is diseased or dead. Remove the branches to the point of attachment. That's one of the things. If you have a branch like this one on the right that is completely diseased or has a lot of dead material, you want to remove it with a thinning cut all the way from the very base. However, if you have another branch that might have some wildlife damage, maybe you have a deer that was browsing on it and you see some damage on the tip, you can do a heading cut. But in this case, what is really important when you do this type of cuts is that you always cut it to a lateral branch. Why? Because if you don't cut it to a lateral branch, right underneath this cut that you're making here, you're going to get a lot of regrowth. And instead of having one long branch, you're going to have a lot of small little branches, like a witch broom. And that is what you're trying to avoid by making a cut to a lateral branch. This lateral branch is going to take over all of that dominance, and it's going to continue growing, and it's not going to generate a lot of new regrowth. So that's the first step. You want to remove everything that is diseased or dead. The second one is to remove those pesky little water sprouts and suckers. This is something that you want to do with a thinning cut. You want to take them from the very base. You want to take all of them from the base. So all of your water sprouts and all of your suckers are coming from the rootstock. You want to develop, you want to remove them, taking them completely, not leaving any stumps. The third process is to remove from the base crossing branches or growing upwards. So what you can see here in this picture on your left side, there's a big branch that's growing all the way up here. What this is going to do when it starts growing during the growing season, it's going to generate a lot of leaves and new lateral branches, and it's going to shade all of this branch right here. If you remove this, then you're going to have all the light that is going to get into your branch, and it's going to illuminate all of these areas where you're going to have fruit. So removing things are going upwards into the canopy, and also removing those that are crossing. Look at this tree. It has this big branch here that is crossing right here, this other branch that is crossing right there. This is going to generate a lot of shade in the base of your tree, and you want to remove those. The fourth one is to remove overcrowded branches. You can see in this picture on the left side, there's a lot of branches that are growing here and a lot of branches that are growing there. There are 1, 2, 3 on the same spot. Those are too many branches that you want to thin out a couple of them. And in this case, you can see here, there's a cut that has been done and this big branch was removed. And the reason that this branch was removed and not this other one is that this branch is almost as big as the main trunk. And so you want to remove branches that are getting too big, okay, before you remove the ones that are weaker. Those branches that are too big are going to take over, and then are going to be very difficult to remove. So you want to take them once they become about 3/4 of the size of your main trunk. So now that I told you what to do in those 4 steps, I will tell you what not to do. And this is something that I see a lot. One of the things not to do is to do heading cuts on suckers or water sprouts. What's going to happen here? You're going to end up with a lot of regrowth from these stumps that you left here. Don't do this type of cut. This type of cut is the worst cut, doing these heading cuts, because as I said, this is going to result in a lot of buds that are going to break that are right underneath here. And instead of having 2 water sprouts here, you want to end up having 10 of them. What you want to do is this. You want to actually take them all out from the very base. If there's a branch, even water sprouts, suckers and branches are in the wrong position, you don't want to head them. You want to take them from the very base with a clean cut. This is a really good example of what not to do. I see so much of these pictures. You know, you do all of these heading cuts, a lot of these tiny little cuts all over the tree. What this is going to end up, this example, exactly what I wanted to do is that you're going to end up with so much more growth on the very top of the canopy up here. This is all going to shade this canopy down there, and you're going to end up with a worse problem. So no heading cuts like this, leaving stump. You either remove the entire branch or you just don't touch them. Another thing that you don't want to do, going back to the same idea of not doing these heading cuts, is this kind of thing. A big branch in which you decide to remove a portion of it instead of removing all of it. Look what happens here. Look at this water sprouts that is here. See the level of damage that you have here? This is full of disease. This is going to be all dead afterwards. And you have all of these big branches that came out of this cut. These are the kind of things that you want to avoid. Again, if there are a couple of things that I want you to take away from this talk, one is open up the canopy for light. That's what we're looking for. And do not head those branches. If there's a branch that is in a wrong position, just take it out from the base instead of cutting it in half. And with that, I want to leave some time for questions. I know it was very fast, but it's recorded and you can watch it again. I'm happy to answer any questions now.
Thank you so much, Amaya. That was great. So if people do have questions after this, where should they go to as far as a resource?
We do have a website that is fruit.wisc.edu. It's mostly related to commercial fruit growing. So our website is extremely for commercial growers. We do have a section for homeowners. What I would recommend is that if you want to learn more about how to prune your fruit trees in your backyard, you should contact your local extension office. There's usually a horticulture educator that can help you with that. And if that person might not help you, they will contact us on campus for more resources. So look at the website and go to your local extension office for finding more resources. I'm sure that you'll find, as I said, a horticulture educator that can help you with questions about pruning.
Thank you so much, Amaya. So we'll get to some questions here, and I know there's a bunch, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. There were a few questions about how much can you safely prune or safely trim at one time?
If you have an old apple tree that you're trying to bring back to life because you haven't pruned in a very long time, I would say do not prune more than maybe 1/5 of the entire tree. You want to do it in maybe split the cuttings to reshape the tree in a 3 or 4 year process. You start taking one big branch 1 year, then the following year you take another one. So you take at least, it's going to take you at least 3 to 4 years to reshape a tree. So never take more than 1/5 of the entire framework of the tree, because what's going to happen if you take more is you're going to get this response of very aggressive growth the following year. That's exactly what you're trying to avoid.
Great, thank you. And I'll mention that we do have a short evaluation survey that we'd like everybody to fill out. The link is in the chat, and we'll put it in there again too before the end of the program. Okay, so I'm going to try to cruise through. There's a lot of questions, and I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to get to them all, everybody, but there were a few that I saw. It sounds like some people have some grafted trees or a 4-in-1 tree. Are there anything different that you do for those?
If you have multiple cultivars in one rootstock, no, the same principle is applicable.
Okay. I did see some questions about reducing the height of a tree. Mm-hmm. So I know you showed the example of those heading cuts and leaving, not to leave those things, and it's just going to keep growing. So if people need to reduce the height of a tree or of an apple tree, what do you recommend?
The same idea that I said of pruning to a lateral branch. So if you're going to reduce it, you want to be able to find a place where there's a lateral branch so that you can make the cut and there will be a lateral branch. And that lateral branch will take some of that vigor that otherwise, if there's nothing that is growing where you make the cut, that's where those dormant buds are there will break and produce more shoots. If that's the case, if you are not able to find anything and you still want to prune it, you will have regrowth. What you can do with that regrowth is during the growing season, where you see those suckers that are growing, those water sprouts that are growing, you can try to bend them down to stop them from growing. That will help stop that growth from happening and setting some flower buds for the following year, and you can calm those trees there. But it requires additional work during the growing season of bending down those new water sprouts that are coming out from a big cut from the very top.
Great. We had some questions about when do you start pruning? Like at how old should the tree be to start pruning, or can you prune one that's a couple years old, and do you need to keep pruning every year forever?
You can start pruning as soon as you plant the trees. If there's within the tree, there's let's say, for example, branches that are in the wrong place. Maybe by the second year, you have a lot of branches that are on the very base, very close to the soil surface, to the surface of the ground, and you want to remove them. You can go ahead and remove them. It's fine. What you don't want to do with a new tree that is maybe 1, 2, or 3 years old is do a lot of pruning. You might want to remove 1 or 2 branches in the wrong place. If you do a lot of pruning with new trees, it will delay when those trees are going to start producing flowers and fruit. So the more you prune a young tree, the longer it's going to take for that tree to start producing flowers.
Okay. I think we had a lot of questions about, it sounds like people have had a lot of unpruned or unmaintained trees, or you move into a property that has a lot, and they can start pruning those, right? They can start taking and start the process, because it will take a few years to get it to a shape that you want.
Yes. Yes. And I want to say there's so many YouTube videos out there. That's another thing. I feel like sometimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good videos. Go to YouTube, look for videos. Ideally, you want to look at, maybe videos that are made from an extension program at a university that have, also not only, showing somebody just pruning, but that can give you some more tips about how you can adapt some of that. That is really important. But there's great videos. And I didn't want to repeat the same thing that is already out there about how to bring back to life some of those neglected trees. But again, this is going to be a long process. It's going to take you at least 5 years to be able to prune a tree that has been neglected and maybe is way, way overgrown. You need to do it, step by step, because if not, you're not gonna get to your goal of having that tree shaped again.
Right. I did see a question about, you mentioned summer pruning. Does that put the tree at risk for disease or anything if you're pruning in the summer?
Well, you want to try to prune when it's dry. If you prune, there's possibility of getting a really bad disease that's called fire blight. If you do the pruning around July, that is by the time that we actually do start seeing the buds are setting for the following year, so the tree sort of slows down. By July, the possibilities of getting an infection of fire blight, which is a very deadly disease for apples, is much, much lower. So don't do it in the spring, do it in the middle of the summer. So I'm saying like, mid-July, late July, early August, about that time. And ideally when it's dry.
And I did see some questions about using like a sealer or a pruning paint or something like that. What are your recommendations for that?
Yes, you can do that. It's not necessary, but for example, in commercial orchards, we don't apply anything. We just go ahead and we prune, and we don't. There's no time to do those kind of tasks, and so commercial growers don't, and they still have healthy trees. But if you are making a really big cut and you're concerned, you can definitely use some of those products to protect the cut.
I did see a question about, is it okay to use a chainsaw for the larger?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. If that's what you need, you can go ahead and use it.
Right.
Hopefully you don't have to get to that point.
Right. There was several questions about, do these tips that you're mentioning for apple trees, do they apply to other fruit trees like pears and cherries?
Every fruit crop has different structures for fruit production. So in the case of pears, you're mostly going to have spurs. So those shorter units where you produce every year flowers and fruit that are in 2-year-old wood and older. Okay, that's where you're mostly going to find all the flowers and spurs. In the case of cherries, sweet cherries are going to have most of the flowers, and they're going to be clusters of flowers. They're going to be right in the area of union between a 1-year-old shoot and a 2-year-old shoot. That's when you're going to see a lot of flowers that are going to be there. That's one place where they have it. The second place is again spurs on 2 years or older wood. That's the case of cherry. In the case of peaches is the only one that is different. Peaches only have flower buds on 1-year-old wood. So if you have a peach tree in your house now, if you prune everything that grew in the summer of 2021, you're going to have no flowers.
Okay. There are some questions, Amaya, about the shape. Do you need to prune it to a certain shape?
No, not necessarily. What you don't want to pruning to is to a shape that, it's an inverted triangle, that you have a much bigger, you have a really heavy canopy on the very top and very narrow on the bottom. Because what's happening, all of this area on the base of the tree is going to be shaded because you have, these very big branches. So you want to have sort of like a shape of a pyramid, in which is narrower on the top and wider on the bottom. Whether you have, different floors of branches, whether you have like just one central leader and, branches distributed in different ways, it's okay. The important thing is that you get enough light inside the canopy. There's so many different ways of shaping a tree. I don't think that there's one specifically for apple trees. The important thing again is that you don't have a lot of biomass and shoots and leaves on the very top that is shading the base, because the fruit is only going to be on the top and nobody wants to go and pick at those apples that are on the top of the tree.
Okay. I am going to put the link again into the chat about completing a short evaluation survey about this program. As Amaya said, we do have resources on the website, on the Hort Extension website, as well as the UW Fruit Program website. If you just Google UW Fruit Program, you'll get to it, and there are growers guides, home gardener growers guides on there too. So that is all the time we have today. I want to thank you again, Amaya, for sharing your knowledge, and thank everybody for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye now.